Welcome to Murali End. My name is Mark Machado. I'm in New York. I am joined by the Professor of Cricketology, Dominic Machado, my cousin in Boston. And I'm also joined by Sri Lanka's #1 cricket historian, my other cousin. I was going to call you my brother in London, Nick, but it feels like I'm kind of degrading the relationship between me and Dominic. Just for the sake, for the point, for the record, I consider both Dominic and Nick my brothers, but technically, Dominic is actually my cousin. Anyway, we're talking today about day 2 of the first test between Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. If you haven't come across us before with the Murali End, we talk about Sri Lankan cricket almost all day, all night in various WhatsApp groups or anyone who'd listen. Sometimes it's just like random Uber drivers, not sometimes, quite a lot actually. And we do this on kind of all platforms. So wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening, hit the subscribe button, hit the follow, get into the comment section, tell us what you're thinking, what your thoughts were in the day. If you've got any questions, throw them in. We'll try and get to them as well. These kind of post-game wrap-ups are normally quite short. We have a longer show that we do on a Monday, generally, depending on the kind of cricket calendar. But let's get straight into it. Nick, me and Dom had a good go at Sri Lanka's bowling performance yesterday, so I'll come to you first. What were your thoughts on the day's play today?
Oh, well, as we were just saying before we came on, Marky, that little last session after the rain interval dramatically changed the picture, right? Up until then, it had been tough toil, 130 overs, 4 wickets, something like that. There didn't seem to be much going. It was a struggle to figure out how Sri Lanka were going to take a wicket. And then, that rain just put a bit of spice into the pitch. Milan found a little bit of seam movement. And now 480 for 9. It's been a long 2 days for Sri Lanka, but if they can start well with the bat tomorrow morning, they'll feel they've still got a foothold in this game. That second innings is going to be really crucial to how this plays out.
Yeah, I think before we get into what might happen tomorrow and what might happen for the rest of the game, let's focus a little bit on the performance today, Dom. Milan Ratnaika really came into it post the rain break, but before that, it was a bit same old, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a bit dull, dry cricket. I think that's the problem. Part of it is the pitch. We have to be clear that it is a very batting-friendly pitch. And as soon as moisture came into it, which is what happened after the rain break, it kind of came alive and Sri Lanka were able to do more things. But at the same time, this is the pitch that you're preparing, right? It's home cooking. Galle pitches have been flat the first couple of days. The last few times they've played there, you got to have plans. And they weren't helped out by some of the umpiring and the fielding. I think Nissanka dropped a fairly regulation catch at mid-wicket. I think it was off Litton Das. Milan was unlucky a couple of times with LBW shouts where either there was a tiny nick or it was given not out and it was just barely sort of umpire's call. So there was a little bit of unluckiness, but at the same time, they didn't bowl particularly well. They didn't bowl as if they deserved wickets. It's not as if 489 for 9 is a bad, is sort of reflects unfairly, unkindly on Sri Lanka's bowling performance. I think a big thing that I saw was Prabath wasn't really threatening, with the left arm angle. And we'll talk a little bit about that with Thirindu. But he wasn't keeping it tight either. He wasn't sending down maidens. He wasn't saying, okay, you're going to have to do something risky to kind of beat me. And the Bangladeshi batters more or less dictated the pace of the match. So for me, that's the problem that I see with the bowling attack is that, yes, pitch wasn't really great. Yes, there were some opportunities that maybe didn't go their way, but they really didn't do anything to trouble the batters or make them work for the runs or do anything different to try to change things up until after that rain break.
Yeah, Nick, there was some on the Monday show, there were some questions about Prabath and why we don't kind of consider him amongst Sri Lanka greats. I'd say on the scale of Sri Lanka great to Sri Lankan player not so great, the last few test matches, actually the last kind of 6 months hasn't been vintage Prabath, has it?
No, I think this was another ugly showing for Prabath on good pitches, right? You know that when the surface isn't offering a load, he can look a little short of craft. And as Dom said, he really didn't keep things tight either. 48 overs, 2 maidens, 154 runs conceded. And I mean, if you look at what Thurinder Ratnayaka took 2 wickets really early on, and then the 3rd wicket he got was kind of a fortunate one when he was bowling that really defensive leg side line. So, I mean, if you look at past those first 2 wickets, the spinners have basically gone 1 for 300, a really lucky wicket. And I mean, all too often, I know we've said this before and it's the same old gripe, but DDS kind of seems happy just to plug them in without much kind of thought of mixing things up, or I don't know, man. We've seen 3 overs from DDS here, nothing from Ange or Kamindu. I've gone on record and said that I don't think Kamindu's the best test bowler, but you look at the World Test Championship final and just an over from Aidan Markram changes the game, gets Steve Smith out, right? You might as well try Kamindu for an over, give Ange an over here. If nothing else, it just breaks up the batter's rhythm. Yeah. And I feel like too often there aren't those plans. But I mean, look, the fact that the seamers have taken 6 of 9 wickets tells a story in itself, right? And that usually isn't the case at Galle.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I thought it'd be nice for Ange to get at least an over in because it's his last test. I also think that Kamindu's been kind of chronically underused as a bowler. It's interesting for me, and people will be screaming, yeah, but it's a different format. It's, but when Kamindu was playing for SRH, and obviously in T20 cricket, you have to try and get boundaries. So it's, in a way, it's kind of easier to take wickets. But they found a way to use Kamindu effectively at points when he was in the lineup. It's ridiculous to me, Dom, that we're not using him in these kind of situations where it just feels like we're having long periods of the game where we're kind of just waiting for the batter to make a mistake, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think that Kamindu should have been used. Just let him roll over his arm. It doesn't have to be for a long spell. It could be for 2 or 3 overs. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But as Nick pointed out, Aidan Markram, again, who's not really a test spinner, bowls a bit in the T20 format, was able to change the game with 1 ball to Steve Smith. So if you don't try it, you won't know. And sending down 30 more overs of Thurinder or Prabath when they're not really doing very much seems to me a sort of pointless ploy. And you're right, Mark. I was surprised that Angelo didn't get a bowl. Isn't it Sri Lankan custom to give every departing player a bowl? Even Demuth got to sort of ended his test career bowling. And Angelo, of course, we know has spent more time bowling, but we can think of Mahela getting James Treadwell stumped in his last game in Sri Lanka. So bowl Angie a little bit, see if something can happen. But that being said, I will say props to the seamers. I thought Asita bowled really well. I thought Milan bowled. He was the one guy who kind of kept a defensive line the entire time and kept the runs tight. It was 27 overs and 38 runs, or 23 overs and 38 runs. Either way, an economy below 2. And he was sort of at the stumps the entire time, forcing the batters to play, but not giving them room to sort of score big shots. And then once the moisture came in, he got that seam movement and was able to get a couple to nip back into the batters and Castle Bangladesh's lower order. So shout out to both Asita, who moved the ball both ways really well when the ball was moving, and Milan, who kept a very kind of tight defensive line that forced the batters to play and eventually yielded wickets.
Nick, me and you were at that Old Trafford test when Milan made his debut, and mainly made headlines for his batting, not more than his bowling. But he's really come on the last 6 months since, hasn't he? He looks really accomplished at this level now.
Yeah, I thought he came on through the course of that England series and that his bowling got better and better. He as Dom said, he can stick to tight lines, and if there's a little bit of seam movement, he'll find it. And he bowls decent enough pace that it's troubling. He's also, a multifaceted cricketer. He's really good in the field, and he offers lower order batting. So he rounds this team out nicely, right? I think the suspicion is, I was a bit feeling this when he was picked, that he'd been picked to bat at number 8, and I was slightly skeptical of that decision because I always think if you're going to pick two seamers, they should be your best two seamers. But he's chipped in here fantastically and proven me wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a lot, but Sri Lanka cricket, somebody there, or somehow, we are doing a great job with creating not just one or two test seamers, but there's a whole little farm of them now, and we've got different seamers who can do different things and play in different formats, right, Dom? It's quite an exciting moment.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was interesting to follow up on Nick's point here is I'm curious what would have happened if Lahiru Kumara was fit, because he's the kind of bowler that you'd imagine on these flat pitches where there's not much going on is capable of doing something, capable of troubling batters just with his pace and the lines and lengths he bowls. So it'll be interesting when he comes fit to see what happens. I think it also kind of reflects on that dynamic you were just talking about, Mark, between pace and spin, that Sri Lanka did not choose to go with 3 spinners on this wicket. They chose to go with 2 pacers and 2 spinners, even if it was Milan Ratnayaka playing that all-rounder role who they expected to come in and fill that second seamer spot, right? They could have gone with a Qasim Rajatha or a Vishwa Fernando. So it's exciting to see Sri Lanka's seam bowling prospects in Test cricket, and we've talked about in ODI and T20 cricket, which we'll talk about more in the weeks coming up. But maybe it's a reflection to some degree of the weakness of Sri Lanka's spin bowling stocks, at least in the Test format at the moment.
Chamindra on Twitter messaged us earlier to say the current Milan is a different beast. He is the bowling all-rounder we desperately needed. Should be in the ODI team as well. I don't know what you think about that, Nick. Is a white ball call up for Milan Ratnayaka imminent?
I could see it, bearing in mind that I've never seen him bowl with a white ball, so it's difficult to tell. Yeah. But he seems to me like the kind of player who would certainly fit well into the ODI setup, right? He can hit a long ball. We've seen him bowling in Test, but he looks like the kind of bowler who's probably got a nice off-cutter up his sleeve. I'm here for it. He definitely brings balance and energy. And yeah, I like him as a cricketer. I think he's underrated.
If you're watching or listening and you can't be listening because the listeners are pre-recorded. If you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, firstly, hit that subscribe, hit that follow, and send us any of your thoughts or questions. We'll love to get to them. Ruben sent a question in. What's ailing Prabath Jayasuriya? Why has it been so hard for Sri Lanka to find a spinner with longevity post-Herath? Nick, I'll let you take this because was Turindi one of your past pupils? Was he one of your former?
No, he was long gone before I arrived, man. But he's part of the Thomian army nonetheless. What's ailing Prabha? Look, I think Ruan's question's not easy to answer, right? It's first of all, the Murali Herath legacy is a difficult one to inherit. And I think that, the bar's been set really high. And so it's natural that Sri Lanka might take a while to find another spinner of that quality. What's ailing Prabha? I think just a lack of variation, right? Lack of skill on flat wickets. He's a really good bowler when he's getting that little bit of assistance, but it can be a little bit samey, a bit one-paced, not too much working in terms of angles or variance in flight. I think it's just a little bit too one-dimensional when he's not getting assistance out of the wickets.
So some people will say, Dom, that part of Prabath's issue has been that when the pitch is good, it's very, very good. And when it's bad, it's very, very bad. And actually, it's as much a groundskeeper issue as it is a bowling issue. What would you say to that?
I think the thing that's strange and that maybe speaks to that point is that he bowled better in South Africa and England, I think, than he's bowled in these first and second day pitches at Galle. perhaps that's a role definition issue, right? Because you go into Galle and you expect Prabath to be your wicket taker, to be the guy who puts pressure on the opposition, to run through the opposition quickly. Whereas when you're playing in England or in South Africa, we know Prabath is not going to be the guy who takes a 10 for. We know that he's a support bowler there. We know that he's bowling defensively, and his job is to keep things tight. So I wonder if part of it is a mix of pitch and mentality. When you turn up at Galle, the expectation is that Prabath will just give you tons of wickets. But if we're going to play matches at Galle that have sort of sporting batting tracks for the first couple of innings or first couple of days, it changes the dynamics a lot. You're expecting Prabath to come in the fourth innings and kind of run through the side. And you're also putting a lot of pressure on winning the toss. Right now, Sri Lanka, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, is up against it because Bangladesh have piled on almost 500 runs and they haven't had a chance to bat. And that's pretty much purely from the luck of the toss. Right? These are very, very, very good batting conditions. So I think it's a mix of things. I agree with Nick that Prabath perhaps doesn't have the variation or the guile of someone like a Rangana Herath to prize out those wickets at tricky times. But at the same time, there's a little bit of message confusion, perhaps, between what's our expectation of Prabath at Galle and what kind of pitches are actually at Galle. Because if par is going to be 400 or 450, which I would say is fair for the pitch that we've seen, you can't expect too much from Prabath on day one and day two. But nonetheless, Sri Lanka are expecting a lot from him on day one and day two.
Yeah, well, obviously, if he doesn't anything less than 15 wickets in a test match for just a handful of runs, I think we can, as Sri Lankan uncles, which we're all drifting towards our uncle phase now, that we can all be disappointed with, right, Nick?
Yeah, man. I think also maybe the slowness of these pitches doesn't benefit him. And the one thing I would say is that I still think that, if this pitch starts to break down and Sri Lanka can put some runs on the board, he could still be the key man second time round.
Absolutely. I was actually looking at Prabath's record because I was thinking, he's kind of underwhelmed me in these last 6 months, especially at home. But it's not as bad as you might think.
No.
So he took 5 wickets in the first innings of the last test against Australia, 5 for 151. He took 3, 3, 6, 5, 4, 5, 3. This is basically in the last year. He's taken significant numbers of wickets at home in the first and second innings. Sometimes it's been fairly expensive, at least not the most profligate of spells, but he's taken wickets. This is by far his worst performance at home. Even
thus far. He could, overall, he could turn the whole game around, right?
Right. I mean, what I mean by that is in terms of an innings performance, this is his worst innings performance. Even in that short 6 over spell against Australia in the fourth innings of the second test match, he took a wicket. And this is the only innings at home where he's gone wicketless. And there have only been, 3 out of 23 innings where he's had fewer than 3 wickets. So maybe, it's easy to say he's not producing the magic he did when he first showed up on the scene, but he's been more than adequate over the last couple years.
Guys, I want to wrap this up in a few minutes. There's one more thing I'll say on the Prabath issue or innings is that batters now have had a real chance to have a look at him. There's a lot of data on him out there, which there wasn't as much on a year ago. We've just had this comment come in. The real mystery is that why SL spinners get bad once they got the national cap. Is our national spin coach that bad? Look, I have no thoughts on whether or not he's good or bad because I'm not an international cricketer, and B, I've obviously never worked with him. I don't know. But what I do think is it's really unusual in a setup for someone to be in that position for as long as he has been. I mean, I can't even remember when he came in and who he replaced. It was that long ago. And when you think about how transient some of the leadership positions around the Sri Lankan team have been in the last, forever, it's quite unusual. When did he come in, Nick? Can you remember?
I've got no idea, but it seems like he's been in this job for a very, very long time.
Dom, can you remember when he came in?
I think it was 2008, 2009. And they brought in another spin coach, supposedly, but Pial is still there.
It's kind of a bit bizarre, but anyway, it is what it is. Presumably, if he was that bad, if they didn't like what he was doing, the players would have got rid of him somehow. I'll just go to this question quick before we talk about what might happen next. KZ plays would bringing in Patarana and Awalagay in a strike bonus be a good idea as they both add something extra. Weller with his turn and Patter with his pace and action, plus Weller can bat. I'll be honest with you, and I'd like to know what the other two of the panel think on this. I think that ship has sailed for both of them. I think that they're too far down the franchise cricket game. I don't blame any of them. One day in the IPL is probably you're going to earn about 10 times what you'd earn in playing 1 year of Test cricket for Sri Lanka. So if you can get that work, it's good. I think they're too far down it. I think it would be difficult, definitely with Patarana, to get him to play Test cricket consistently. I suspect that both of them at some point they'll play 1 or 2 tests, but I don't think it's going to be a long-term thing. And I think we're probably a few years away, probably in their late 20s, early 30s. They might both say we want to play some Test cricket. I don't know what the other two think on what Dom and Nick think about that.
I'd love to see Lalagay consider it. I was struck by the fact that Jewel Brevis and Luandre Pretorius were both just included in a kind of South Africa change squad, I think, for a series against Zimbabwe. So if they want it, it's there. I think Patirana at the moment has to prove that he can handle bowling 10 overs in ODI cricket before we even think about him with a red ball.
Yeah, I mean, KZ Players has also followed up with Patarana did say in his doc they wanted to play Test cricket. I've talked in the past about how I think it would be really difficult for Sri Lankan players to ever come out and say they didn't want to play Test cricket. I think it's difficult for basically players around the world to say that, unless maybe now the kind of conversation in and around the West Indies, I think, has moved on a bit. So if you're from that part of the world, I think you can kind of be a bit more upfront and what your actual real intent is. I'm just going to give us a couple more minutes to talk about what might happen for the rest of this test. Nick, how can Sri Lanka win it from here? What would be your strategy going into day 3?
Well, they got to score 400 plus, right? First of all, get that 10th wicket without the tail wagging, and then put up a score of ideally 450 plus in decent time. I think if they are behind or can achieve parity or just ahead, it doesn't really matter. The time is the enemy now, right? If they're going to win the game, bat big, bat quick, and then look to skittle Bangladesh in the 3rd innings. That's the only path to victory I can see.
Dom, what are you saying? Have you got any other ideas?
I mean, I would think the goal is to kind of try to pile on 600 runs in the next 2 days, right? That's the optimistic plan. Get ahead, and then hope that the wicket deteriorates on day 5 and Prabath runs through Bangladesh before they catch up to our small lead. You know, that's sort of the option we have. But yeah.
Raul is asked, can this match a result or will it draw? I think as a Sri Lanka fan, my plan would be, this is obviously my plan, it wouldn't really ever pan out like this because it is cricket. Try and get to about 700 runs and then declare around tea time on day 4 and give yourself a day and a half to try and bowl them out. And potentially, if you needed to, you might have a bit of time if you need to get any runs, though. They got to about 700. If you imagine it's probably going to finish about 510, 515, you'd maybe, if Prabath has a day out and if Tarindu get some wickets, that you could get the W. I think that's the way forward. Anyway, guys, we've been the Murali End. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be back after the end of day's play tomorrow, probably about the same time, which I think is 10 o'clock in the US, 3 o'clock in London, and I believe it's 7:30 in Colombo. I think, but I'm a bit all over the place with timings. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hit the follow. See you tomorrow. Bye.